Good morning. I didn't attend the party last night, so I'm reasonably fresh this morning. For those who don't know LiSTNR, LiSTNR was a product that we actually created many years ago. We got into the business of audio many years ago, or more to the point, radio. But we knew that in actual fact, what we had to do was cater to a more diverse audience across multiple devices and with very different personalised applications. So in terms of LiSTNR, we created LiSTNR. First, let me just tell you a little bit about our company. Our company owns 100 radio stations in broadcast radio. We've created 25 dedicated IP music stations. We have 600 plus premium podcasts. We are the key sporting partner for the major sports in Australia, being the NRL, AFL and Cricket Australia. We are the developer and we are the owner of LiSTNR. We have exclusive and prolific global and local partnerships, which I'll talk to today. And we also have exclusive sales representation across multiple companies, both domestic and international, including SoundCloud and Sonos. And we certainly have a fully digitised architecture, which I'll also share with you, across all 60 offices that we put forward. Of course, the most important thing is that we have a highly engaged, passionate and experienced workforce amongst our people across those 60 offices. But 2 years ago, we set out to disrupt and transform the entire digital audio industry. Today, LiSTNR combines the best in live radio. We've launched exclusive local and international produced music podcasts that combine full-length songs. And as I said, the journey started about 5 years ago when we clearly understood that consumers and users of our products would not go in and out of certain different apps that we'd developed over time, that in actual fact they wanted a single destination. And to that end, LiSTNR became the centre of our business, and it became the house of LiSTNR as we describe it. First of all, I'd just like to share with you a brief introduction for those of you who don't know about LiSTNR, and it'll give you an indication as to where we've come in the last couple of years.
Launched in 2021, Australians far and wide have opened their ears to LiSTNR. Look at me now, look at me now. With radio, podcasts, music, news and sport all in the one free app, LiSTNR, the biggest creator of premium audio content in Australia. Featuring a vast catalogue of content with over 600 premium podcasts, 100 radio stations, music streams and live sport from Cricket Australia, the NRL and AFL. Plus partnerships with internationally renowned podcast networks, SXM Media and Wondery. Available on iPhone, Android, smart speakers, smart TVs and Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. In tune with what you want. Simply pick your favourite topics, the music genres that interest you, the podcasts you like, the live sport broadcasts you can't miss, the live radio stations you love, and LiSTNR will deliver your own personal audio experience. Every day you'll be served the most recent and relevant episodes of your favourite podcasts, plus recommendations from your preferred audio categories. Your radio tab is loaded with music stations and playlists to suit your interests and mood, including your favourite live local and national radio stations and new all-music radio stations. Listen to the latest podcast releases or search for your favourites by category. Discover new shows and find news and sports near you. For our clients and brands, we're able to provide highly targeted and contextual audio advertising. Using our first-party data, we can create bespoke communications to increase audience appetite. Our proprietary dynamic ad technology allows for an adaptable and personalised audio experience. LiSTNR has delivered compelling and creative ad solutions and has already seen incredible success in a short amount of time as the fastest growing audio app in Australia. Open your ears to a new world of audio. Download the LiSTNR app and listen for free.
Have some faith, I'll make you a believer.
So today, LiSTNR brings together everything that consumers want in a single digital platform or an ecosystem, as we would describe it. And in doing that, I guess since we launched only 2 years ago, we have actually started to focus on 4 product pillars that I'd like to talk to you about today. Personalisation, content and discovery, commercialisation and visualisation increasingly across what we are now seeing as the development phase. So it's beyond the ideation, it's beyond the deployment and launch. We are firmly now in the scaling part of our business at this point in time. And we shouldn't take that as a maturity phase, because I think the maturity phase will come well and truly after scaling over the next 2 or 3 years. Personalisation is at the heart of this app. And as a radio business, we fundamentally used curation, building select offering for specific audiences. But for LiSTNR, which appeals to Australians, we need to personalise the product to ensure a meaningful and relevant experience for each and every person. People have different habits. They consume different audio content during different times through their commute. Some don't even commute. And certainly they use different devices through the course of the day in terms of how they actually utilise device for their daily habits and needs. So we start by collecting some basic information around their age, their gender and their postcode. And then we enable people to select the topics and shows, as you saw in the video, that are actually relevant to them. And in doing that, this is something that we can do over time by favouring shows or a topic on the app. And we keep track of that as we go off, including where they left off in a particular audio feed, whichever they had. We store all of this data in a personalised LiSTNR ID, and it's a secure and private profile that contains all the users' information, their preference, and their actual usage. To do this, we use some pretty scalable cloud platforms, including Google Firebase and Salesforce Customer Data Platform, otherwise known as the CDP, and also Marketing Cloud. And by storing all of this data in the cloud, these platforms enable us to deliver a familiar and continuous experience across all devices and channels, whether they're using the mobile app, whether they're using the website or through email. All those touch points are personalised and retained. Flicking across into discovery, and content discovery is probably one of the toughest challenges that we have in audio. People form very strong habits, and you need to listen for a long time to decide whether or not you in fact like that show. Often people rely on word of mouth or recommendations as their friends understand them, and certainly in the session just previously we heard from 3 young people who gain most of their recommendations from their friends, family or colleagues. And we try to be that friend on the way through. Our goal is to provide content recommendations that are as good as those friends, but equally relevant to the person for the moment that they are there. The recommendation has to be good, but the timing of the recommendation also has to be right. The way we're approaching the challenge is by partnering with AI and ML companies to understand users better and to make predictions on what they'll listen to next. Our partnership with Source sees us ingest all of the listeners' preferences, habits and usage patterns, and we use AI to predict what content they might like next. We can constrain this model to provide different types of experiences in the app. For example, display podcast episodes or new shows they've never listened to, and we monitor their performance of those sections of the app and feed that back into a machine learning model, which actually helps improve over time. To enrich this further, we're also using a partner called Sonnet to transcribe every audio piece that we deliver. That gives us a detailed analysis in terms of the content and the topics within a particular episode or a show. We can then relate this back to a user and what they're consuming, or whether or not that could be a trigger for an interest that they might have next. It's very early days, I must say, but we're seeing signs that this is starting to work as we see consumption lift, which I'll go through in a second. The third and very important part, of course, is commercialisation. Our ad offering is at the core of the commercialisation strategy. This is a free app led by advertising-funded activities. And we need to create a competitive and compelling opportunity for brands and agencies to engage in our platform at scale. As a baseline, we provide our clients with addressable audiences fueled by our first-party data. This means that the digital audio inventory on LiSTNR can be targeted by age, gender, location, and device. But this is just the start. We've partnered with Number 8, a technology that uses the telematics and offers data such as where a Wi-Fi is and how it's connected to deduce where the listener is listening. For example, are they at home, are they out running, or are they in commute? All of the data is completely private and never leaves the device, meaning that whilst respecting a user's privacy, we can deliver them in a way and a message to them that is more relevant to what they're doing at that point in time. Another partner we work with is from the US, which is Frequency, and they enable us to deliver truly dynamic ads, changing the creative based on the person and what they're listening to. This can be anything from weather, UV indexes, or in fact sport. The most success we've had is with sport, and we've actually also adopted it into our broadcast of over 50 stations of our 100 stations on the Triple M network. So what we can do is have a dynamic ad insertion at the end of a break or coming into the next break, which highlights the score or what might be occurring at that point, and doing that in real time for those sponsor or, in fact, the advertiser of choice. In terms of visualisation, that is also becoming, I guess, a growing interest for all of us. And in actual fact, a lot of this conference has been about those platforms, particularly social platforms like Instagram and TikTok, that have a visualisation element to it. So we are embracing visualisation more directly within LiSTNR. We've typically done it through our social marketing to obviously enhance the brand, our shows and the people around those shows. But we're incredibly noticing that the boundaries between audio and video are continuing to merge, particularly in the podcast space as platforms like YouTube and Spotify expand their support of visual podcasts. Though we've visualised our content for over 10 years, and given that we've just finished a 5-year digitisation program to ensure that we actually have a fully connected, digitised platform across 60 offices and over 400 studios, we now are at a very interesting point in our future to move forward. It is a complex process. It is one that we must furnish with editors, writers, directors to ensure that the video is contextualised not only for the platform but also for the subject matter of the platform that we put forward. So to that end, we do see visualisation as a pathway moving forward that we can adopt, and also a commercialisation opportunity as we move purely from audio into video as well. Let me just give you a quick indication of one of our offices that was recently completed as part of our 60 office regeneration. That's our Melbourne office, and imagine 60 of those offices fully connected across Australia that allows a content producer or creator to work from any place, at any location, to fundamentally upload, share or deliver their content from that particular place. So we're very proud of that program, which effectively is complete after 5 years, and that was an investment of around $80 million worth of capital expenditure just to get to that point in time. But it gives us the opportunity to obviously embrace the visualisation of each and all of our studios and our producers. You will have seen from that video that in actual fact, a studio for LiSTNR would look very different from a studio of radio. That in actual fact, different presenters wish to present in a different means, and to that end, we have to cater to that. We also have other lounge room style models that we also operate in. So I guess the key point here is what's happened since I was with you 12 months ago. And a lot has happened. This is an app that, as I mentioned, is only 2 years old within Australia, albeit we've been in the broader digital audio model for many, many years. In terms of signed-in users, and this is not people who have downloaded the app, but these are people who physically have signed in, has actually hit 1.25 million. In actual fact, that's a couple of weeks old. It's now about 1.3 million people who have actively moved across. So it is the fastest growing audio app within Australia, and it's accelerating at pace at this point in time. Of course, all of that's just fine, but what you do need is, it was a tricky task to do, and I wanted to take you through the migration as to what we achieved on the way through. Because migration was key, because we had legacy apps, we had legacy ways in which we marketed and promoted our assets, and therefore different ways for people to go into multiple apps to find our content. So the first thing we did, which was in about the middle of last year, was we turned off TuneIn. TuneIn effectively, we felt, was infringing upon our copyright, and effectively, whilst we had a healthy dose of people finding our stations, they weren't finding it through us. So we're moving from what we now know to be the unknown user into a known user as you sign into LiSTNR. The second thing we did was we actually launched a web player. And the LiSTNR web player I'll talk to in a second, but it has been extremely valuable in terms of the way in which people interact at different points throughout the course of their week or day. We also turned off 85 apps. And those were the 85 apps that fundamentally serviced our 100 radio stations. And 1 week before the grand final of our key sporting event, we actually turned all of those apps off at one point in time within a 7-day period. And in doing that, for those people who wanted to listen to the grand final, the biggest sporting event in Australia, effectively they had to walk out of that unknown world straight into what was a known world through the front door of LiSTNR. And we do have, as I mentioned before, the exclusive digital streaming sporting rights, even though for 30 years we've owned the broadcast rights to each of those codes. Most recently also, and we've spent 18 months in discussion with Stitcher and Wondery, we have onboarded both exclusively, and we are the exclusive agent to both of those companies for Australia. And we're very proud of that point in time, because what it did add was about 500 podcasts to our platform, which offers more choice, more discovery, and more options for all of our consumers on LiSTNR. Of course, we built Australian first. So today we have over 170 weekly premium podcasts that we deliver with Australian stories for Australians. But we understood that at a point in time what we had to do was make sure we opened the door to international partners. And Stitcher and Wondery, we couldn't find a better partner on a global basis. Of course, all of that has driven about a 700% increase in stream starts. And every stream start is a monetisation opportunity on the way through. If we look forward, and I guess on the far left, you'll see where we sit today, and that's in terms of consumption. It's the mix of consumption that's balanced across radio, music and podcasts. So a lot of our own people and a lot of the market were very concerned that this app would in fact replace the consumption of radio. And when you have 60 offices and a couple of thousand people in our family, that was a real challenge for us. What you'll see is the bottom two bars are in fact our two networks that hold those 100 radio stations. And through to what we've projected out to June 25 is the look as to what we think it'll be. And you'll see from that the consumption of those two principal radio stations is quite meaningful, to say the least. In actual fact, it's underpinning the future of broadcast radio into a streaming broadcast model. Of course, the third element there was the first time that we'd started to create music options. Of course, yes, Spotify is a companion, and there is either a free option or a paid option. But we thought we'd experiment with LiSTNR Music, and we now have 25 music-curated free stations that people can listen to. We also, you can see there in the blue line, the LiSTNR podcast and, of course, our partner podcasts. The partner podcasts have only just been recently onboarded around October last year, so it's pretty early days for us. But you can see the consumption mix on the way through, and that's very important for the depth and scale that we have in terms of our product. Most importantly, we're very disciplined in terms of what content we want to onboard. So we don't look for any and all podcasts across every topic and every genre for every age group. We are very disciplined, and we have effectively 6 focal points. The first one being radio and music, the second one being entertainment and culture, the third being sport, fourth being factual and drama, the fifth being parenting and kids, entertainment, and lastly, news and information. We believe those 6 verticals are key to our success, and we're very disciplined in the way in which we onboard and identify podcasts that can enrich each of those 6 verticals. If in fact it doesn't meet the criteria of those 6 verticals, typically we won't onboard them. At the same time, we also go through an onboarding phase, and every podcast starts with 0 audience before, of course, it becomes more meaningful. And we have Tier 1, Tier 2 and Tier 3. It always starts at Tier 3, and we always want to get them to Tier 1. If in fact any of the Tier 1s move down to a Tier 3, below a threshold, we will exit effectively that podcast because it's taking time, money and resources to keep it. But of course the opposite is true for those that are actually started with 0 and all of a sudden might be in the 100,000, 200 or 700,000 listens a week. And if that's the case, our marketing machine will obviously get behind that in a very meaningful way. I mentioned some of our partners, and the partners range from Wondery and Stitcher, most recently Diamantina podcasts in Australia. I've talked about our sporting contracts. We also have the BBC, sports media. We're working with Apple on a range of activities at this point in time to create more short and long form music compilations. We have the Royal Institute of Australia that works with all Royal Institutes around the world in terms of science. And some of our technology partners there with Source, Sonnet and Frequency that we've also taken equity stakes in. So we've bought shares in those companies to influence the trajectory of where they sit, and that effectively enriches where we need to go. Last year I mentioned that content is king and distribution is queen. We still believe that to be absolutely true, and certainly the depth and scale of the content that we have, we believe is meaningful. And secondly, we want to expand our distribution and create, once again, more stream starts across a broader remit of platforms to market and effectively grow our ability to monetize our audience. Today, we spend a lot of time broadcasting across or distributing our content across Apple and Spotify. And in every single case, we control 100% of the ads that go across each of those platforms. So the RSS feed that leaves us effectively has an embedded ad, and therefore we control it wherever the consumer is listening to that particular podcast, and we retain 100% of those funds on the way through. Why would Apple and Spotify do that? Because we're enriching their platform. And in actual fact, they allow us to do that economic outcome of us retaining 100% of the monetization across their platform because there's people migrating to their platform because of our content. We're in discussion with YouTube and TikTok, and whilst we already use them in many ways on a social connection, what we aren't doing at this point in time is creating bespoke content, but we're about to start. The last 2 slides, I want to just talk about our workforce evolution, because in actual fact, in the last 4 years, we've had a demonstrable change in terms of our workforce evolution. Our headcount has actually reduced by 12%, mainly because of the technology that we've employed within the business. At the same time, we've had an enormous growth in the number of digital specialists within our business, being a very traditional business, you might say, in terms of radio broadcasts. However, the amount of content that we play out has grown by 66% in 3 years, or in fact 400,000 hours. So to that end, we now push out about 1 million hours of content per annum. And of course, the composition of our workforce has changed demonstrably. So we have about 200 of SEA's workforce, highly capable digital specialists, including data scientists, UX and UI designers, digital developers, commercial digital specialists, podcast creators, sound engineers and the like. So the shape of our people are changing. Of course, if you're not a digital native or experienced executive, we have retrained our entire workforce such that they have a digital-first mentality moving forward. You can't go through a slide through a presentation of this note without talking about the money. And on the far left, you'll see what we were doing when we were just in the podcast model. We were doing about 7.1 million worth of annual revenue. The moment we launched LiSTNR, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, we jumped up to about 10.4 million. We've grown by about 50% throughout the course of 2022 to about 15 to 16 million. This year we're on target with revenues growing at between 65 and 85%. And we think we'll hit somewhere around $25 to $30 million this year. This is new income that fundamentally is being driven purely by this platform. This doesn't account for our other 100 radio stations nor our 85 TV networks, which I didn't mention earlier on. So the money slide tells us that we will get to break even within the period we want. It'll be cash flow positive. And as a public company, certainly looking at those revenue numbers that we think will continue to grow at that sort of rate as the market matures and grows, I think the broader marketplace of investors will start to realise that. Just to finish off, LiSTNR very much is about bringing together a scalable product where in actual fact you have multiple audio options. Not one, not two, but multiple audio options. And hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight. It is an engaging audio ecosystem that can be accessed across any device at any point in time. It can offer a free, personalised service to every Australian. And of course, it can enable them to discover the absolute best audio content available to them in Australia, from Australians and from abroad. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, fantastic. I mean, I love the disclosure there. I mean, showing you numbers. I mean, really very impressive and very kind of you. We do have some time for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, would you like to get a microphone to a gentleman there in the middle? If you'd be kind enough to say who you are and where you're from, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much. I'm Andrea from Italy. I work for a broadcaster, the main broadcaster in Italy. I wanted to ask just two questions. The first one is, if I understood well, Spotify is one of your main competitor, but at the same time is one of your main partner for the distribution. Is it correct?
Yes, that's correct. We call them a frenemy.
Frenemy is nice. I will use for my presentation in Italy when I will be back, definitely.
There you go. Still with pride, exactly.
And the second question is, how was possible to have an exclusive with Wondery? This Amazon Music is not present in Australia.
Actually, yes, Amazon Music is in Australia, but because of the scale that we had built, and most importantly, the megaphone that we hold. So being one of the larger media companies in Australia, across the breadth of Australia with, once again, our 100 radio stations and our 85 TV networks, let alone LiSTNR, that is a megaphone that we can offer to Amazon and its products like Wondery to actually improve awareness of their products. We can promote them very aggressively, and they chose us ahead of any other party within the Australian region, no different to Stitcher, mainly because of that megaphone. We have about 700 salespeople on the ground, so we have a lot of touch points with all major agencies and about 13 to 14,000 small to medium-sized direct clients. So the combination of that allows us to not only create a megaphone and awareness, which drives downloads and uptake of those products, but also it drives the monetization aspect. And we have an exclusive arrangement with both of those parties.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for your question. Who would like to go next?
The one thing I will say is just before boarding a plane here, I had a meeting with Spotify, and we do see ourselves as companions. What consumers do go to Spotify for is quite defined in terms of their view. And yes, whilst they might have aspirations to be more, fundamentally you are going there for music, skippability, etc. Of course, it's very hard to find any local news, information or entertainment on Spotify. And that's where our products effectively come into play. So we see them as companions, even though we're not naive enough to know that there is a competitive spirit and we will overlap occasionally.
Okay. Right, a gentleman here has got the microphone. Please say who you are and where you're from.
Kia ora, Grant. My name's Gary and I'm from New Zealand. I'm part of one of the major radio stations in New Zealand and we're part of an ecosystem. My main objective is to get as many listeners as possible, listening for as long as possible, and hit my sales targets. So I'm hoping you can kind of get into the weeds a little bit of when I'm asked, I get a bit cringe when I'm asked to promote other channels that basically say, stop listening to my radio station and go listen to something else. So do you have sort of an insight on your cross-pollination between your channels, maybe inter-office politics, but also how you incentivize your staff to go and buy into the bigger picture here?
From MediaWorks or NZME?
NZME, iHeartRadio is what we're talking about.
Very good. Thank you. I was over speaking to the guys only in October last year, actually. I think that was quite hard in the early years, where in actual fact, I can still remember one of our radio hosts who had been with us for 35 years. I remember standing up doing a presentation of this type, and he said, the last thing I'm going to do is promote LiSTNR, because it will force people to go off radio and effectively go to LiSTNR and listen to something else when they should be listening to me. And P.S., I've been doing this for 35 years. I corrected him and tried to educate him as much as I could. It took me about 2 years until he worked out the money slide there that actually says that at this point in time, an overwhelming amount of people are actually connecting to his show through an IP-enabled device. And effectively, if we're relying on radios to actually be the source or device of choice, I think we're in trouble, because not many retailers or manufacturers are selling new devices. So this is an IP-enabled world. It actually took that individual, because in Australia we have about 105 broadcast definitions, as you would in New Zealand. And effectively the only people who could listen to that person were the people in his geography. But of course now anyone at any place can actually listen to that particular person. You might have a holiday house in that particular region. You might want to know what's going on. So all of a sudden, that person realised that in actual fact, it is a wider distribution through this IP-enabled network, and I should embrace it. But this was a 35 to 40-year-old stalwart who's just retired. But his last thing was embrace LiSTNR as he left everyone. We had a not dissimilar issue with a whole range of our people at the Hit and Triple M networks in producers who said, I'm not producing anything on podcasting, thanks very much, because I have to do the best thing for radio. If you're in the session before, you would have heard 3 younger generation people who said, either I don't listen to radio, I haven't listened to radio, and one said, I'm actually not sure how to turn on the radio or find radio. If that is the younger generation, we have to be easily accessible on a device of their choice. And fundamentally, if they wish to wake up with radio, we have an alarm clock model that actually you can set the alarm clock to wake you up to your favourite radio station or your favourite music track or your favourite podcast, whatever the case might be. And we know that different people do different things through the course of the day, and we map and track that and then monetize it, of course. But what we have to do is ensure that if they can come into our ecosystem that has that depth and scale, and fundamentally they can walk into that house of LiSTNR, and all of the people who are in podcasting or listeners, I can assure you when we surveyed them said, I hate radio and I'm not listening to radio. Of course, a lot of the people who love radio said, I'm not a podcast listener. When they walk into that known house, and we know who they are, and they start listening to their favourite radio station, they might look across the hallway and hear a great song or see a great opportunity to engage with music. And then they look across to the rowdy room where the sport's going on and they go, I'll go and visit that. And of course, they then find themselves in the podcast room, or in fact, the international room with Spotify, Wondery and Stitcher. What happens is you get this oscillation of people staying within your ecosystem for a longer period of time on platform, and the longer they stay, the more things they find. So we're continually doing that. And I think when you tell that story, what happens is people start to drop their guard. And we purposely put LiSTNR in the middle of our business as opposed to a startup outside of the business. And a lot of media companies have put those businesses outside to protect them. They typically can remain small, niche and isolated, even though there's a lot of capital and time behind it. We elected to put LiSTNR bang smack in the middle of our business. And in actual fact, everything we do, we talk about through LiSTNR. So when we take major bus sides or whatever, it's all of our radio talent behind or in front of the LiSTNR brand. And people have become synonymous with the fact that LiSTNR represents their audio world, not just their radio or podcast world. Yeah. So I'm happy to take it offline, but that's sort of part of the methodology and process we've gone through in the last couple of years.
It's fascinating. I mean, this idea that accessibility and ubiquity are essential, and getting on this idea of having this distinct distribution network, which was FM, DAB, which was radios, is not the future. You do that, you're dead. You've got to be where people are, and particularly for young audiences. It's fascinating. Can I ask you a quick question?
Just
the migration.
On that, the interesting thing is, if we had 30 people up here and said, do you listen to FM, AM, DAB plus, IP enabled, which are typically engineering terms, no one would understand. They say, I just listen to what I listen to. I don't really care how it is. So the more seamless it becomes, and the less we talk about those options and we talk more about the world of audio, I think the more engagement we'll receive.
That's the point. We should forget expecting the listener to know. They just want
Absolutely.
to.
That's our problem.
Yeah, that's our problem. Can I ask you one quick question before we go back to you? You're next, that guy over there. When you showed that migration chart, which I thought was fascinating, and you turned off TuneIn, you turned off the 85 apps, you had a big sporting event to get people through your front door. What do you do if you haven't got the equivalent of a big sporting event to make that migration happen? Because your numbers are impressive, but you need some compelling thing, don't you, to get them into your platform?
Yeah, we had the beauty of that. That said, when we turned off TuneIn, and we've spoken to a lot of global broadcasters around the world, everyone said, what percentage of consumption was it? And we told them what it was, and it was meaningful. And they said, you're very brave. And we said, but we don't have a choice. Okay. If we're moving from an unknown to a known world, we have no choice but to turn off TuneIn. And we did. Everyone thought that was very brave. Secondly, if there's not a major sporting event, we'll create your own, whatever that might be. And that creates the opportunity to tell your story and transition people. But it does take a long time. We gave them a countdown for over 45 days as to what was going to occur. And it went down to the hour, to the minute.
They're all last minute making the change.
And then they said, we've told you 16 times that we'll be turning it off, and then we did turn it off. So we've retired 85 apps, by the way. We no longer have to service 85 apps with 85 teams across 60 offices.
So cost efficiencies.
So the cost efficiencies are naturally coming into the market.
Fantastic.
Into our
it's
business.
very, very, very exciting. Very brave, but very successful. Right. Sorry, I kept you waiting. Gentleman there.
Yeah, hi. I am Anders from the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. I noticed your slide with the expected consumption on your app. Music was quite big. Our experience is that unless it's skippable music and music curation, people don't actually use that in our app. So I was just wondering what it is that makes you that makes music so big for you in the future, or why your expectations are so high.
As part of the ideation phase, which was about 2 years before the launch of LiSTNR, we spoke to all of the record labels and publishers, and of course they all proposed the Spotify economic model. If we'd adopted that economic model, we'd never make a dollar. So to that end, we came up with a different model that has been certified. I can't tell you what that is, but it has been certified, and it does allow us to curate as many music-only radio stations, with or without ads, at our elect. It's probably only governed by the number of licences we have in DAB. We own 50% of the DAB spectrum in perpetuity in Australia because we bought it from the Australian government at a point in time. And that is a conduit to allowing us to play that. I've always been long on the fact that I think music is a very, very important part of consumption of audio for any consumers. So I've probably pushed more so than anyone in the company for more and more. So we started out with 5 and there wasn't much effect. We then moved to 10. We started to deliver now 25, including Santa Radio once or twice, a term. And we can do that in a different way. If Bruce Springsteen's coming to town, well, we'll create Bruce Springsteen Radio. And we'll light it up and close it back down again because we have that capability.
And do people actually listen to it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there's 2 benefits at the end of the day. 1, we are putting ads in the middle of it, so we are commercialising it. 2, people are enjoying that within the house of LiSTNR or our ecosystem, so they're staying on platform longer. And they don't stay there forever, but people love curated outcomes. And in actual fact, with Spotify, you do find a lot of curated outcomes. We're not at full skippability. No, we don't have 10 million tracks. But then again, if you look at consumption of radio for the most part, and music, the top 10 will principally make up 80 to 85% of the listening consumption. So therefore, we play in that part of the spectrum of radio and music.
Fantastic. And Bruce Springsteen is on tour at the moment.
Yes.
As you may know, I'm seeing him in Spain on the 30th of April. But
normally a 3 or 4 hour
it's
event.
It's a 4 hour gig.
Nothing
else.
I'm
seeing him in Barcelona. But I don't know whether he's coming to Australia or not. I hope he is. Right, one final question. Last question. Who would it be? Lady at the front here in the yellow, please. If you get the microphone down here. Lady down here, please. Run. She's just right at the front. This will be our last question, and then it's a coffee break for 25 minutes.
Hi, I'm from Portugal, so a very different scale, unfortunately. I would like to ask you, I tried to download your app, and it's not possible in my country. I would like to know if you are going global, if you are thinking about that. And I'm also interested in knowing what's your biggest challenge for this year? What can I expect for the next year to hear from you here?
Yeah, thank you. And Portugal's a beautiful part of the world. I think in terms of listening, yes, we do have our content with some of our partners is obviously geo-fenced. So to that end, it's not necessarily available on a global level. But then again, it's very hard to monetize your audience outside of your own territory. I don't think advertisers and marketers really wish to pay for something that is out of country or out of state for them. So to that end, yes, we think the internationalisation of LiSTNR is an opportunity for our company. We have been asked by many broadcasters from last year's presentation and our soundings in the market as to whether we'd license this product on a global basis. We don't want to turn this into an enterprise product. We're not Microsoft. We'd have to spend $15 to $20 million turning it into an enterprise product. That said, we do think a partner and propagate model is something that we will invest in. And in doing that, we actually went to one of the universities and we were the subject matter for an MBA group of over 200 MBA students. And they effectively mapped the world for us, every player, and where LiSTNR could in fact go over time, and we then prioritised that. So we're thinking about that at this point in time as part of a partner and propagate model, where we will effectively take LiSTNR into those markets. Some of our product and content will travel. The tech will certainly travel. We could share the data back to the individuals, but effectively you can enrich the LiSTNR product with your own podcasts and your own radio. Next year, if I'm here, we'll be talking about monetisation, because this is about education and monetisation. You can't build this product and effectively not give a return to shareholders on the way as a public company, whether you're public or private to that end. So we are getting scale. I think the numbers will be probably 3 or 4 million in a population base of 25 million people in Australia. So we see years of growth, and we're long on audio and radio. But one must monetise the product, and it's about education in the market. It's about layering that, creating an investable market, and then gaining the maximum share from that. And we'll do that either in partnership with some of our peer set, or effectively, and that peer set might also include Spotify. Spotify in Australia has about 52 people. 48 of them are salespeople. So to that end, there's no personalisation of content fundamentally within Australia. It is more about the monetisation of their platform. So hopefully that answers your question.
Fantastic. Grant, we'd love to see you again next year. Always a pleasure. Please show your appreciation. Grant Blackley, CEO of Southern Cross Austereo. Thank you, Grant, very much indeed. Right, coffee break now for 25 minutes, then it's going to be Dennis Clark in here from iHeartRadio talking about music, Bruce Springsteen, and all sorts of stuff too. So enjoy your coffee. Thank you very much.